But could you just fill in a little bit more for us about the original edition and then how it came into being, first of all, in 2012, and then, of course, now in 24. We should say, of course, 30 years since Derek died this year.
So Gareth actually has a big part to play in having brought this book back to life. Also, I will just take this opportunity to say thank you to Gareth for setting this whole evening up. He acts as though he's had nothing to do with it, but we're really all here because of Gareth, so thank you. And the book did in large part come about because of Gareth, yeah. So Gareth, I was running Test Centre, really tiny press. Gareth said, there's this Derek Jarman book, we want to reissue it, we've got 3 months, do you want to do it? That's how I remember it. And I don't know how we had this opportunity because we really were very small press. And we had a quick meeting with Tony Peake, Jarman's biographer, and who was at that time in charge of his literary estate. I think we kind of gave him a good enough sense of being reliable and caring about the project. He gave us the green light. I think there was a contract, and then we were given a collection of scans, and the whole book, this edition and the original, is all produced from scans of one of the kind of crumbled copies. The few copies that do still remain have kind of turned kind of scaly and are sort of falling apart. So that was what we were given, and we just pieced it together, and within 3 months we had it printed and ready. I think we did 700 copies, so we had no distribution. We just kind of found bookshops that we knew would be interested. We had an amazing launch at the London Review Bookshop with Ali Smith and Keith Collins, who I was just asking Declan, like, what was the status of Keith and Jarman's relationship? But I think they were partners, and Keith cared for him in the final years and was living or kind of owned Prospect Cottage. And it was very much with his blessing that the book came about. I think it may seem strange to have republished a book that he destroyed, and was it kind of the right thing to do? But I think Keith, who knew him so well, felt that it was something he would have wanted. So I think it's a project that was done for the right reasons. Anyway, that print edition went out of stock quickly. The rights went back to the estate. Then the original designer emerged and had not been told about this reissue. I don't know whether anyone had tried to contact him, but he suddenly was understandably slightly upset that this book had suddenly reappeared without his blessing. For this second rerun, it's with his blessing. He knows, he's acknowledged, so it kind of feels like it's been done even more properly, and now we have proper distribution, so it'll be interesting to see how much more widely it goes out into the world.
No, thank you. And we should say that the reason the first edition came out with some speed is because it was the 70th birthday. It was Derek's effectively 70th birthday, which of course he never lived to see, in 2012, and now we're marking 30 years since he died. So obviously different reasons and different bracketings. But just to say, I think the reason Jess and Will were approached is because their project Test Centre, which then shifted and ebbed through Jess into prototype publishing with the new edition and many other titles, absolutely embodied the spirit of kind of creative collaboration outside of pure commodification, a sense of a real community built around the works that you make. And so it was not in any way a difficult conversation to have with the estate about why a very small press at that point should be doing it. It was entirely in keeping, it seemed, with the original impulse of the poetic publication. Thank you, Jess. We'll come back to you, shortly about the other book that you published as well. But so yeah, it'd be great to hear from you now, because Derek Jarman, it's very unclear for us in the UK to get a sense of how Derek Jarman is received in the US, what sense and where Derek sits culturally in the US, and obviously also personally for you. It'd be great to hear how important and what kind of influence he has had on you, and the sense of kind of comradeship with Derek.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. Well, it was beautiful seeing Glitterbug, because it was nice seeing everybody alive and enjoying the day. And I don't really like thinking about that time period because I mean, I lost more than half everybody I knew to AIDS. It was terrible. And but I do want to say this: there was this wonderful man when I was 18. I had this thing that I did where I was dancing for money on stage with in a jockstrap, and when you do that, you're gonna. Well, I was there to make money because I was so poor, but you're gonna make a lot of gay male friends doing that. It's like a windfall. But this one man named Dale introduced himself to me. He's about 25 years older, and he had this like perfect helmet of salt and pepper hair and eyeliner, just impeccable eyeliner and a ring on every finger, but didn't like Liberace, which was very strange. And because he looked like an impersonator. But he'd like to educate, he would like take me to Walt Whitman's house, and because I lived in Philadelphia at the time. And then, you want to be polite to older people, so he would say he was gay, and I was like, oh, really? Of course I knew that. And then he would show me the studio of the house of the 19th century Philadelphia artist Thomas Eakins, who is a good friend of Walt Whitman's and did a very famous portrait. But we went to New York often because it was only about an hour and a half away by train, and we went to see, with some of his friends, The Last of England. And everybody back then was talking about, but the fact is almost everybody I knew who did died. So I don't really it seemed like when I was younger everybody was talking about these films constantly. And but going to see The Last of England was quite an experience for me, at least, because you'd heard about it, you'd seen things in a magazine about it coming out, you've seen stills, but it was sort of going to see the Niagara Falls. You can't really be prepared for what you're going to experience. And to see that film on that big screen was like the gates of heaven opening. And Jarman's anger for the Thatcher regime was matched with our anger for Ronald Reagan. And I don't know, we just sort of lived in that film for months after seeing it, talking, bringing it up all the time. Also, I wanted to say that the British poet and artist Martin Corliss Smith, who now lives in Boise, Idaho, good God protect him, he and I were just talking the last few days, and he told me about there's footage in Glitterbug of outtakes from a journey to Avery, and he claims that Martin's painting is heavily influenced by that film, and it's just lovely seeing those stones look like they're singing, the silhouettes, and I don't know, I feel like that's enough to say about that.
Thank you very much. We're going to hear from you and from Declan reading some of the poems from the book. Would you like to do that now?
Sure. I'm going to start with the 18th poem. Death comes through mirrors as a blind man with a violin collecting grudging offerings. I ask you, is the hat full yet? And you reply, consider the fiery red cherubims in the blue sky, or those empty cavernous spaces where the image scatters in the silver. No, his hat is empty. He is a young man with violet in his eyes. He is blind and sings. Number 20. Moon 2. A new image, neither hallucinatory. A new image, nor brimstone. Moon's new image, a smiling, friendly image. Neither harvest, neither throw a pane of glass, neither crescent, nor geometrical, nor egocentric. New image, to retire away into deep igloos, throw ice, come snow, come sleet, to be terribly sorry I was late, and confound the astronomer. 22. Mark Rothko's Dawn. By the time the dawn had shrunken, after the time of coupling and uncoupling, and the rapture among the sofas by the time the night had shrunken, with a small protest, and the skies had come stars, and the universal orgasm, After the trees had wept their leaves amongst the skyscrapers, lamenting the transience of billboards, after the phallus had fallen in the still sad stasis, and the milkman had broken the silence, by the time the night had shrunken, and the shadows were streaked with silver, in the holy miraculous interval, the sky reached forth vermilion fingers and quietly extinguished the light bulbs. 25. 6 pages. I dropped 6 pages of the Sunday newspaper at the edge of the field, and the wind blew away kings, princesses, whole countries, one presidential election, and several eminent letter writers. 27 is beautifully positioned. It's called Moon, and I love that it is that because the moon has a 27-day cycle. The world is just the axis of this world is on Moon. It's the 27. Where there's if you cut yourself, it takes about 27 days exactly for the cells to proliferate and reknit, and there are 27 bones in the human hand, and in the Kabbalah, there are 27 channels to God. In Sanskrit, 27 is assigned a Harshad number. It means joy giver. There's the woman's menstrual cycle is 27 days, and the male ejaculate travels 27 miles an hour. Of course, that's if you're in New York. I don't know what it is in Columbus here, but if you were in New York, it's 27 miles per hour. So there, Moon. Who are you up ahead, one before the man with a loony mask, tearing paper at the edge of the field, tearing the world at the edge of the superhighway, moonstruck? The world crept by, the new moon silver bright, and I turned darkening the leaves. And the man spoke, moon is for lovers, moon shrouds world's monstrosities, moon calf, moon men, man in the moon. Moon is for ripe goddess, Eau Claire de la Lune, bearing stone effigies. Once in a blue moon, moon purse, moon's moth, moony. Moon is Mr. Massey's vision of the future. Moon skates between elms, telegraph poles, and chimney pots. In the mansions of the moon, the man with the loony mask tearing the paper at the edge of the field, tearing the world at the edge of the superhighway, moonstruck. Just a couple more. Number 30. This is a beautiful little poem. It's called Poem. In the common silence of the world, the white poppies of my love are dancing. And just one more. The last poem, Farewell. We have dissected and proven our loss through the small hours. We have awaited new forms in Italy and invented rose gardens in the billboard promised land. The highways have come to nothing, have arrived at neither the end nor the beginning. Now, in these our letters, we are building a marble monument to cover a grave. The days are numbered. We have proven our loss.
Thank you very much, C.A. Wonderful. So great to hear these poems inhabited and read by different voices. We launched the book in the bookshop terms 2 weeks ago with Peter Scalpello and Somaya reading, and again very distinctive, wonderful contributions there. And there to hear the poems with your wonderful voice, CA, and not least the last one with the line Billboard Promised Land as a way through to the other book that Jess published, which is the only fiction Jarman ever wrote, never before published until this edition, found in the archive. And Declan, really, that brings me over to you now, because you wrote a key essay in that collection, this new edition. And that idea of a kind of poetic world that Derek inhabited on the page, and of course we've seen on the films, that in a way sowed the seeds for much of the work to come, the kind of world making, the sense of imaginative possibility that he found there. And you've recently charted his relationship to a queer radicalised ecology in a brilliant essay for the Edinburgh Companion for Queer Reading. And I just wonder if you could sort of take us into your way of thinking about how these elements join up.
That's a lot of elements to bring together. I guess maybe the first thing I quite like to say, just coming off the back of those great readings by CA, is that the one of the main links of the poetry to the film that you've just seen, there's no like direct correlation, but as with much of Jarman's work, the oblique connections and interweaving and interpenetration of different mediums is the connection. And CA mentioned that each of the poems has a postcard. I don't know if you've got the book yet or not, but each of the poems is accompanied. I was going to say matched, but they're not necessarily matched. They're accompanied by an image. And when I first read Through the Billboard Promised Land, which I went to the archive to read, my process of reading it was very quick because I didn't have very much time, but also the speed of the text is very quick. And the scenes, they're almost like they move too quickly. And one of Jarman's friends, called Peter Fillingham, wrote an essay where he said that in relation to watching his Super 8 films, it's almost like the images disappear before you've got a chance to really get hold of them or take them in. And he said that there's like a desire for them to linger around longer than they are. But in the fleetingness, there's something which actually increases the way that they last with you. This isn't really answering your question, but I think I just wanted to mention that one of the links to Through the Billboard Promised Land is this like visual culture that Jarman was grappling with and thinking about through text that then translated into the film work, because he hadn't made any films when he wrote Through the Billboard Promised Land and when most of these poems were written. So film wasn't really part of his practice at the point that the poems were written, which was mostly in the mid-60s. So a lot of the poems in A Finger in the Fish's Mouth, they have the date, so 63, 64, that kind of time. And they were written when he went to America. And he went there to kind of because of the pull and the allure of American culture, and to escape the kind of post-war Britain that he was living through. But also for a man, he went to visit his friend/lover, and again the kind of description of how to think about that relationship is, as we were chatting about how to describe his relationship with Keith, is kind of narrated and described in different ways throughout Jarman's texts, and then also slightly differently again through the guy was called Ron Wright, through his commentary, some extracts of which you can find in Tony Peake's biography. But he went to America and stayed with this guy Ron Wright in Canada, and then that kind of fell apart loosely and went over to San Francisco. And all of the, well, I say all of them, a lot of the poems were written while he was traveling and while he was thinking about the Beat Generation, and he was thinking about Burroughs and Ferlinghetti, and almost like trying to mimic a type of writing that they were doing, but not quite coming upon the kind of strong, maybe egotistical I that we find in some of those beat poems. The I in these, in Jarman's poems, he hasn't quite found how he wants to present himself and do a self-portrait. So when you're reading them, you might feel like they're all quite distant from a very strong voice. But interestingly, the last image, which is actually not accompanied by a poem, but is accompanied by a catalogue. So it doesn't have a contents page, but it has a catalogue, which is a bit more like an art gallery might have. Again, he's like blurring forms and thinking about how to... he liked to think that almost all art forms were the same, so he liked to blend and blur them. But the last image is of an artist whose name I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But in his self-portrait, he's surrounded by his own artworks. But Jarman has copied, images from magazines, beefcake magazines, like images of men, and replaced the images of this artist with, these attractive figures. And even though this is not him as an artist, he's almost trying to show us that something about his identity in this last remaining image, where these handsome men up on the wall and are the type of self-portrait that he's trying to show. He's trying to show himself through other people. None of that answers your question.
The question was just a prompt. Absolutely, Declan. Yeah, I mean, would you like to read the poems that you'd selected?
Yeah, I've just selected 4 from the beginning, and most of CA's were towards the end. But actually, the ordering of the poems and their titles is like somewhat random itself, and the images are also somewhat randomly paired with the poems. So, I'm just going to read 4 short poems. The first is poem 2. And it is accompanied by a postcard image of 2 rowing boats in a cave that you can see the opening to in the distance. And this is the first poem, but it's called poem 2. Now I am sailing on this rocking chair, back to where tomorrow washes the pavilions of today. And then this is poem 3. Called From Gypsy, March 1st, 66. And the image that it's paired with is of the rough sea at Hollylake, some waves washing up on the shore, the promenade. I had a dream through the mirror of the morning. I walk where the image scatters on the silver laps and ebbs in pools monotonously. I had a dream in the dawn light, the clouds reflecting the fire of the billboard promised land, floating the highways of delight to new storms, tears, 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 always floating above the house, down each street, caught momentarily between rows of poplars, a flying scarlet apotheosis ascending the skies, now 2, or at this corner 3, float by in the dawn. This is called Manhattan Lower East Side. And the postcard that it's accompanied by is the First National Bank building in Detroit. These foolishly wastes teasing mortality, de-ethical streets, wailing the siren's knell, for Oedipal Europe's distracted sons, leaving paternal warehouses, singing a new world song. And then finally, 3-line poem called Mykonos, which is quite a different representation from the contemporary images we see from Mykonos. It's accompanied by an image of another beach scene with some mountains in the distance and some people walking along the promenade. Now the fishing boats are back in the harbour. The wind is again on the beaches.
Thank you so much, Declan. Thank you. We're going to come back to Declan again very shortly, and to hear from his own writing about Derek directly. Just to draw attention again to the additional material in both collections. So Meyer sets the scene in the poetry collection, and Declan's essay is crucial to understanding this volume, alongside a memoir by Michael Ginsborg, who lived with Derek in the Thameside warehouses during the time that the films we've just seen was shot. So a very close up, very loving and wonderfully informative recollection of Derek's time there. Before I ask CA to read their own poems, Jess, just a little more about where Derek sits in the UK in literary terms now, because we've spoken before about this a little bit, the idea that although at a certain point he was absolutely a filmmaker above and beyond anything else, he then moved into a literary sphere where perhaps is where most people now on a more regular basis will first encounter him. And then of course there is the garden, the whole story of his garden, which is something you can discover without arguably having any knowledge of him as a writer, as a filmmaker, or as a queer person either. So there's lots going on in how Derek is kind of received now. But when you were publishing both collections, where was your sense of where they were landing and sort of sitting in the culture?
Tricky question.
Very personal responses here. No academic position needed.
It's hard. I'm not totally sure whether the readers that these books have found are. I think primarily they're people who already know and are interested in Jarman's work. I think it's looking at the sort of who has published his work is quite interesting. That Penguin Vintage have kind of got a big series of the books now, which I suppose says something about their place in the culture, as you say. I think it's nice, and actually I spoke to Declan about this recently at the other event, because Penguin Vintage were interested in this short story, and Declan kind of reminded me how good a thing it is that we've kept it with a small press, that it sort of speaks to the type of work that it is. I think also these two texts or books are quite they're very early in his career. There's a kind of trying out of approaches, of style, of so many things, that there's a sort of, I don't know, a more experimental nature to them, which I think fits nicely with Prototype or House Sparrow. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think the people who've been most excited about these books existing are people interested in his work, wanting to discover an aspect of his output that wasn't available before.
Absolutely, and obviously with Billboard Promised Land, I mean, you've reprinted that a number of times now. That has really sold a significant number of copies for what is a single piece of prose fiction, in a small press publication that has found its own way, absolutely through word of mouth, I think.
Yeah, I think shiny covers are good.
Shiny.
I mean, I have not published any other books with shiny covers. That's not a thing. But we did the shiny cover for this. At that point, we didn't have the rights to the poetry anymore. Because the title of this story is mentioned both in the poems and also on the back in Jarman's handwriting. So they're very much interconnected. So that was the reason for doing this kind of crazy cover. But that did seem to help.
No, absolutely, and of course, from silver, from the mirror to gold, of course, CA's own shiny cover, incredible new collection, Advanced Elvis course, published by an equally distinctive small press, independent press, Peninsula. CA, we'd lovely to hear some of your own work now, whether from this collection or any of the others, but would you like to set that up for us?
Yeah, thank you. But Declan, do you mind mentioning the Elvis connection with Jarman first?
Yes, it's a small one. So, as mentioned, that Jarman left England to go to America in the mid-60s. And yeah, I'll just... he writes in one of his, I think it's Dancing Ledge, he gives us a sense of what the draw was. And he had a kind of ambivalent relationship with America. Both drawn there, but also resisted giving all of himself to it. And he often talked about the way in which Hockney had a wholehearted love affair with America, and he wanted to kind of distinguish himself, and more ambivalent. He says here, he had a he had a youthful intrigue, and then he says, in the 1950s, we artists in England dreamed the American dream. England was grey and sober. The war has entrenched all the virtues. Sobriety and thrift came with the beverage plan, utilitarian furniture and rationing, which lasted about a decade after the end of the hostilities. But over the Atlantic lay the land of dreams. They had fridges and cars, TVs and supermarkets, all bigger and better than ours. Food parcels arrived with unheard of luxuries, bubblegum and chocolate, fruitcakes wrapped in comics, all virtually unobtainable here. Then, as the decade wore on, we were sent Presley and Buddy Holly, and long-playing records of West Side Story, and our own Pygmalion transformed. The whole daydream was wrapped up in celluloid and presented nightly at the Odeon, at the end of every high street in the land. How we yearned for America and longed to go west. In 1960, every young English artist had an eye across the Atlantic. And I mentioned to CA that Presley was one of the things that Jarman recognised as the draw of American culture being so different to that in the UK.
Thank you. an ambivalent relationship with America sounds about the right thing to do, frankly. Especially now. So I just wanted to say about this book I wrote called Advanced Elvis Course. It's a 25-year-old book. I read it. And I wrote it actually, I was very angry around this time period because I'd lost half of everybody I knew to AIDS. And then my boyfriend at the time, who was one of the main organizers of ACT UP in Philadelphia, was raped and murdered in Tennessee. So I was like ready to ruin a party at that point, And I was at a party and I was talking about how I liked Elvis, and this like loudmouth alcoholic straight man started like going off on me about how Elvis wasn't queer. And I said, well, I'm going to write this book, and I'll read a little of it from you. But when it first was coming out from Soft Skull Press, Lisa Marie Presley had it on the when you went to elvispresley.com, it was my book cover was there, and there was a pre-order button for about a month. And so all these Elvis fans were buying it, and then they started reading it. And, there's a lot of queer content in it, and I'm vegan. It really irritated them to that as well. But, and I would get, some death threats because my phone number's in there. I did these experiments where I would have these tear tags with my phone number, and I would fill up. I'll read some of those. But, people would be really angry about the queerness. I'd be like, listen, Elvis was queer. You didn't know this? And I would say, the song Jailhouse Rock? There are no co-ed prisons. These are men singing to one another. Number 47 says to number 3, you're the cutest jailbird I ever did see. I want your company. Do the Jailhouse Rock with me. Then there's the man, something terrible happened in the shower, and the warden's making him dance with the chair. The whole rhythm section was the Purple Gang. Give me a break. It went right over everybody's head. And it was the number 1 song for many years. So there. Yeah, that was a terrible party. So one of the things I did was I had a poster around the city with a tear tag, and you could call my number, and it said, call Elvis, speak to Elvis, and I had a montage of Elvis on there. And then and I collected my favorite quotes from the answering machine. The very first one was this woman. She says, I'll be bulimic for you, Elvis, if you'll be bulimic for me. This is a very sort of sexy way. That was a keeper. There are things that actually just happened. I went to Graceland a bunch of times and had all these wonderful experiences with all these queer people who were there, and queer people from all over the world. I didn't expect that, and so we had a lot of fun. But there's one thing I wanted to read. Oh yeah, here it is. So at the time when I was writing this book, a lot of my friends were still very sick with HIV. So I was going to all these pagan gatherings to work with herbalists and trying everything. And there was this group called the White Trash Coven. These like working class dykes. They were amazing, and they had a VW bus with an Elvis altar inside, just these thousands of these offerings. And this is what happened one day. I was hanging out having martinis with Rose from the White Trash Coven. At a pagan gathering, I'm having martinis with Rose by the White Trash Coven's Elvis altar when a naked man with a goat on a leash says hello and drops on all fours to worship Elvis. The goat promptly mounts him and fucks his ass, bell around his neck, clang, clang, clang. It all happened so quickly. The goat came up his ass with a grunt, and they were on their way. We didn't know what to say. We hadn't prepared for the goat man's visit. Rose threw her martini back and opened a new bottle of gin, because even if someone had said a man was going to get fucked by a goat at the Elvis altar, there still was no way to prepare. You simply cannot prepare. More than anything at all, I want permission from Lisa Marie to spend one night in his bedroom, on the floor, next to his bed, naked, dressed in the body condom, imagining I'm his happy little sperm after he's gone to sleep, pressed to my condom wall, looking to the moonlit window, quietly, peacefully turning from a thick, white, almond-flavored cream to a clear, sticky puddle, the expired egg-seeker once blissfully shot from his hardened, kingly shaft. Oh, man, what a ride. So there's so many experiments I did with it. I took this my last name's not actually Conrad. Originally it was McNeil, but my mother remarried. I'm actually mostly Irish. And part of this story about that is with my new family, this German family, Conrad, my grandmother was always trying to protect me from my new creepy tribal cousins. And she started giving me this Seder formula to protect me, this sort of psychic protection. She was all about psychic warfare. And she said it came from the Rhineland. And if you're not familiar with the Seder formula, it's in here. But it's all about destroying your enemies. And, and she was all about, you got to destroy your enemies, And I work with Freya Aswin, who's she's from London. She's one of the world's leading Norse scholars of especially women's mysteries. I got to work with her. I was so excited, and I wanted to create an Elvis formula so that the enemies are not destroyed, but they're sort of like this. And she's like, why? You need to destroy your enemies. She was like my grandma. She's like, got to get rid of those enemies. And I was like, all right, Freya, but I really want to do this. And she's like, all right, it looks all right. And she just threw me out of her trailer, basically. But she did look it over with me. And, I also used Priscilla Presley's memoir, Elvis and Me, as a divination tool. Bibliomancy, anything with a mancy at the end is going to be fun, And so what I did was I would ask the book a question. Her book, the paper, I don't know what it is. I had the hardback. Hardback didn't work. It had to be the paperback edition. And you ask the book a question, open and close it 9 times, and it was it was very spooky. I loved it. My little Ouija Elvis thing that I was doing. If you don't mind, I'd like to end with 3 little poems from my other new book that came out from Penguin, UK. So I have my American publisher is Wave, and then I have this. This is a book I wrote with animals thriving in the Anthropocene, because the book prior to this was working with extinct animals, and I realized we needed to fall in love with the world as it is, because according to the World Wildlife Association, we've lost 70% of the wild creatures on this planet in my lifetime. I'm just going to read 3 of these little poems. They stand on the bottom of the page like creatures. And I'm going to read this one. I have a show right now at the Mocha in Tucson where many of these poems are on their sculptures, so they're standing between 6 and 9 feet tall in the galleries, and I'm very excited about that. Part of this forest tastes like the man I love, with an actual number of nails holding the bedroom together. Other days when we died where we felt we became the forest. My car never intended to be a meat grinder, another face going under the waves. We felt awful after hitting the deer. We made love and slept with one of his antlers between us. And this is a good one for right after the Trump election. Never deny the warmth of a burning flag. Sing a 900-year-old death tune just in time to digitize empathy. Sing it for days. Sing it at a chair. Sit on it. Fold the anus gingerly around it. Hold its sweetest note so we remember which ancestor was the first to forsake the power of an ant. And in conclusion, I will read this one. It looks like this. Don't worry. Darkness always accuses us of falling on purpose. You know how to bulldoze me back up these hills. What does darkness know of light filling your navel in the middle of the afternoon? We have not lost our place in line, shaking off the cold. Let's get this garden planted. Give our fruit away to one another. Thank you.
Thank you so much, CA. And if that isn't a wonderful promotion for Advanced Elvis course, I don't know what is. Who knows what else is in that incredible collection? You can find out very shortly with CA signing, of course, your very own copy very shortly. I'm aware of time. Millie's 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Declan, these 5 minutes are yours, and then our wonderful audience can find. Should we got 5 minutes square, or we can hear from Declan, or you can ask your questions outside over a drink and near the signing table. Anyone wants to challenge him, take it outside. No, this is genuinely democratic, unlike most of the systems we live under. Questions? If there aren't hands going up now, we'll hear from Declan. 3, 2, 1. That's it. It's Declan. The floor's yours.
Okay, I'm not gonna read from this, but what I'm gonna say is that a lot of the imagery and ideas and kind of setup in Through the Billboard Promised Land recur and are kind of montaged and collaged in the poetry. So as Jess was kind of indicating, they are companion pieces in many ways, and that kind of process that Jarman was thinking about in his writing, he was also working out in his painting practice and in his design practice. And then when he picked up a Super 8 camera that was kind of gifted to him by somebody that was visiting who was looking for London's Warhol, Tony Peake mentions that Jarman was enthralled by this young man who had this camera, not only by the young man, but also by the process that he might be able to take into, after working on lots of big film productions, where his models for sets got kind of chopped up and repurposed, and he wasn't really in control of the artistic output of what he was putting in. Having the camera in his hand and being able to kind of use that embodied experience to follow his friends and to look into his domestic workspaces, so much more agency over what he was doing, he kind of took off, and it became a practice that he continued all throughout his life. And some of that was incorporated into the more mainstream films like The Last of England and Jubilee, and it also has echoes back to his father and grandfather who were home filmmakers. But Jarman's spin, as you saw on a lot of Glitterbug, a lot of the content is these fleeting moments of domestic life, of artistic life, of queer community, in a London that no longer exists because it was knocked down and redeveloped. And there's this kind of shimmering, Sarah Turner, the filmmaker and critic, calls it like a lusty texture to the quality of the Super 8s. And he started the Super 8s at the same time that this book was published. So he wrote these in the 60s, but they weren't published till 72. And when Jarman starts experimenting with the film, he doesn't just use the Super 8, he then starts to project two different images and layer things together. So you've got this like build-up of meaning. And as you will recognize if you've read Through the Billboard Promised Land, that narrative is like a difficult concept for Jarman. It doesn't necessarily always sit well with him. And that was both part of his kind of nature, but it was also like a resistance to what he thought of as like the commercial cinema of Hollywood, which was built on narrative but actually had no content for him. So the nice link between the kind of layering of images and the kind of gel screen that you saw, particularly in Journey to Avebury, all of the postcards also have been covered over in this like green layering in the original. So he's kind of using the techniques in his image text poetry that he's also just developing in the Super 8s. So, I mean, it's just to say that he's using the same practices in different mediums as experimentation, but also because he liked to think of all things happening kind of in a similar way, no matter what the medium was.
Great. No matter what the medium was. This event is also a medium, of course, an incredible medium of encounter between ourselves and you in the wonderful hallowed environs of the Garden Cinema. Many thanks to Millie and Abdel tonight for making this event possible. Please do find CA, and hold on, please do find CA and Jess and Declan afterwards. The bookstore is available to you. Of course, other drinks are available from the bar as well. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for coming. Huge thanks to Garden Cinema. And please do thank CAConrad, Jess Chandler and Declan Wiffen. Thank you very much.